Chloe Sterling had spent her entire life feeling like an empty space in her own family, someone who was only noticed when there was no one else left to choose. In the prestigious Sterling family, all the attention, praise, and expectations had always belonged to her older sister Millicent. Millicent was beautiful, elegant, admired, and treated as the perfect daughter. Chloe, on the other hand, was always standing in the background, quiet, useful, and easily forgotten. But everything changed when Millicent suddenly ran away after being caught in a romantic scandal. The Sterling family was thrown into chaos. Their reputation was on the edge of collapse, and the marriage alliance with the powerful Dubois family could not be broken without serious consequences. To save the family's honor, Chloe was forced to take Millicent's place and marry Ethan Dubois. To everyone, Chloe was nothing more than a replacement bride. But Chloe refused to enter that marriage like a silent sacrifice. Before agreeing to marry Ethan, she made her conditions clear. She wanted to continue her studies and her work. She wanted financial independence. And most importantly, she refused to be treated like a decorative wife whose only purpose was to stand beside a powerful man and smile. Ethan Dubois, calm, sharp, and unreadable, accepted her conditions. During their first private conversation, he did not ask her how she would behave as his wife. He did not ask her to please his family. Instead, he asked one simple question: "What do you want from this marriage?" Chloe's answer was honest. "Respect," she said, "and the right to be myself." From that moment, something between them quietly began to change. However, becoming Mrs. Dubois was not easy. Chloe soon had to face pressure from her future mother-in-law, Brenda Sterling, who tried to shape her into the perfect Dubois wife. Brenda wanted elegance, obedience, and flawless behavior. She expected Chloe to perform the role that Millicent had abandoned, but Chloe refused to act. At a charity gala, Chloe became the target of cruel rumors. People whispered about her background, her position in the Sterling family, and the embarrassing truth that she was only the substitute bride. Some even questioned her worth in front of others, trying to humiliate her in public. Ethan did not defend her with loud arguments. Instead, he gave her something far more powerful. In front of everyone, he announced that Chloe would be taking charge of an important project. With that single decision, he gave her authority status and a position no one could easily dismiss. The whispers around her immediately fell silent. For the first time, Chloe was not being hidden behind someone else. She was being seen. But after that night, Chloe became afraid. She worried that she would eventually become a burden to Ethan. She began to pull away, trying to make herself smaller, quieter, and less troublesome. Ethan noticed. Without forcing her to speak, he began taking care of her in small but meaningful ways. He changed his schedule so she could rest. He prepared meals for her. He even gave her earplugs because he knew she was overwhelmed by the noise around her. Then he told her something she had never expected to hear. "You are not a burden," he said. "You are the person I chose." Those words shook Chloe's heart. But just as she began to trust him, she accidentally discovered that the marriage had originally benefited the Dubois family as well. Hurt and confused, Chloe confronted Ethan, believing that perhaps she had only been another useful choice. Ethan did not deny the truth. He admitted that at the beginning there had been benefits. Their marriage had helped both families. But then he looked at her and said, "At first there were advantages, but now it is you." He revealed that even before Chloe was asked to become the substitute bride, he had already noticed her. During one of her academic and work crises, he had quietly helped her from behind the scenes, not because of the marriage, not because of the Sterling family, but because he had seen her strength when no one else did. Ethan told her that among many useful choices, he had chosen the one person he truly wanted, and that person was Chloe. Just when Chloe finally began to believe she had found her place, Millicent returned. The sister who had abandoned the marriage now wanted to reclaim what she had lost. Worse, she asked Chloe to help her persuade Ethan to solve her personal, legal, and financial problems. But Chloe was no longer the quiet younger sister who could be used and discarded. She refused. She told Millicent that she owed her nothing. Millicent had made her own choices, and now she had to face the consequences of those choices. This time, Ethan stood completely by Chloe's side. He made it clear that Chloe was his wife and Millicent had no right to demand anything from her. Whatever legal consequences Millicent faced, she would have to handle them herself. For the first time, Chloe did not feel like someone's replacement. She felt like herself. Even Brenda Sterling eventually came to recognize Chloe's strength. She admitted that the Dubois family had been missing someone who could truly stand firm, someone who did not simply obey, perform, or decorate a room, but someone who had the courage to remain herself. And Chloe had become that person. In the end, Ethan proposed to Chloe a second time. But this time it was not because of duty, family, pressure, reputation, or business interests. It was because he wanted her to choose him freely. On a quiet evening, without a grand audience or a perfect performance, Ethan gave Chloe a ring. He promised that he would not force her to believe in his love through words alone. He would prove it by the way he lived. Then he told her, "My standard has always been you." She was not the substitute bride. She was not a tool to save her family's reputation. She was not a decoration beside a powerful man. She was Chloe Sterling, the woman Ethan Dubois had seen, respected, protected, and chosen. And this time she chose him too. But this was not where Chloe's story began. Before she became the woman Ethan Dubois chose with his whole heart, Chloe had spent years believing she was nothing more than the second choice in her own family. So to understand why this marriage changed everything, we need to go back to the beginning, to the Sterling family, where Chloe's pain started long before she ever wore a wedding dress. The conference room door clicked shut, a small sound that nonetheless plunged the entire Sterling household into an embarrassing silence. I stood in the hallway for a few more seconds, watching my reflection in the frosted glass. My hair was pulled back neatly. I wore a black coat. My eyes were bare of makeup, but they held no weakness. I looked more like someone attending a funeral than someone about to be blessed with a marriage. Inside, my father's voice, low and urgent, cut through the quiet. The Dubois family had finalized the signing date. It couldn't be changed. My mother's reply came immediately, as if she'd rehearsed it all morning. "What about Millie? And that photo and her disappearing without answering her phone? What will people think of us?" Millicent, my sister. Her name was like a beautiful stone placed on a glass table, admired by all who passed. And me, Chloe, the felt lining beneath. Unseen, but essential. Without me, the table would be scratched. I took a breath and pushed the door open. Inside the study, everyone was present. My parents, my uncle, some distant cousin whose name I couldn't recall, and the family lawyer. On the table lay a thick stack of papers held together by a cold metal clip looking like a neatly bound verdict. All eyes turned to me. My uncle was the first to speak, his smile, an attempt at kindness. "Chloe, you're here. Have a seat." "I'm not sitting down just yet." I stood there looking directly at the contract. "Where is she?" I asked. No one answered. Or rather, everyone answered with a deliberate silence. Silence to force me to understand on my own. My mother's fingers brushed against her teacup as if afraid even the slightest sound would shatter their honor. Millicent had an incident. I let out a small, mirthless laugh. An incident. I repeated my mother's euphemism for a scandal. The intimate photo with Colin Sterling, then her vanishing act. Someone coughed lightly. The lawyer hunched over his papers, as if he hadn't heard the words intimate photo. My father looked at me, his eyes a mixture of harshness and pleading. "Chloe, you understand the engagement to the Dubois family is an alliance. It's about honor, something our family cannot afford to lose." I continued. My father clenched his jaw, not denying it. In that moment, I found it strangely funny. Not a laugh-out-loud funny, but a funny that made me want to leave my own body to float to the ceiling and watch this long-running play unfold. The play, titled "The Sterlings Need a Bride." The original lead was Millicent. But when she disappeared, the director turned to me, the understudy, and said, "You're up." My mother placed her hand on my forearm, her voice soft as silk. "Chloe, darling, you'll step in for your sister. Just this once. To help our family through this. Just this once." I looked at my mother's hand. The hand that had chosen dresses for Millicent, brushed her hair, taken her to try on rings, beaming as if it were the happiest day of her life. And my hand. That hand usually pulled me into some empty space. A patch. I pulled my hand away. My voice, calm to the point of surprising even myself, said, "I can do it." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Some even nodded, thinking, "Of course, the good girl." Then I continued, not letting their relief linger too long. "But I have conditions." The smile on my uncle's face froze. The lawyer looked up. My father frowned. "What conditions, Chloe?" I sat down, pulling the contract closer, my fingers flipping to the first page like turning over the gradebook of my fate. White paper, black ink, neat printing clauses as long as a tunnel. I felt like I was stepping into a strange house. They were handing me the keys, but simultaneously locking the windows. I looked up. "First, I will continue to attend school and work. No one can use the title of Mrs. Dubois to confine me to the house." My mother started to say something, but I met her gaze and she swallowed her words. "Second," I continued, "I will have my own account in my name, and mine alone. My expenses will not need to go through anyone." The lawyer cleared his throat. Her personal finances, he muttered, then looked up. I spoke without raising my voice, but my words were sharp enough to cut. These are my conditions. My uncle gave a strained smile. Chloe, you're about to marry into a prominent family. Why worry about money? The Dubois aren't lacking. Precisely because they aren't lacking, I interrupted. They don't need to cling to my money. The air grew thick. I placed my hand on the last page where the signature line lay like a demarcation between myself and the person they wanted me to become. Third, I said slowly, I will not be a decoration. No one can use me for photos for parties to be a display vase. If the Dubois family wants something beautiful, they can buy it at a showroom. Don't buy me. My father tapped his hand lightly on the table. Chloe, I want you to step in for your sister. So, I also want to live my life. Silence. So long that I could hear the wall clock swallowing seconds. Finally, my father pursed his lips, his eyes darkening slightly. He turned to the lawyer. Write it in. The lawyer nodded his pen, scratching on the paper, a sound like a slow blade being sharpened. I watched my words transform into clauses, a strange peace settling over me. The peace of someone who had decided not to run anymore. Everyone thought I was conceding, but in reality I was demanding. When the contract was placed before me, I picked up the pen, black ink, a sharp cold tip. I signed. My signature wasn't elaborate or delicate, just neat and decisive like a cut. As the pen left the paper, I heard my mother exhale. My uncle smiled as if he'd just won a game of cards. My father sat in silence like someone who had just delivered a precious commodity. And me, I thought, you want a bride to save your honor, you have one. But from today on, I won't live by anyone's script. I stood up, pushing my chair in neatly. The conference room door opened the hallway, light flooding in, thin and cold. I walked out without looking back. In my heart, something had broken, and something new had begun to grow. The private room on the top floor of the old-fashioned restaurant was thick-doored, a small lantern hanging outside, giving an illusion of warmth that the cold interior contradicted. I sat up straight, my back erect, hands resting on my lap, my lips curved just enough to avoid being called impolite. Years of being the well-behaved child had taught me survival skills. Smile at the right moment, stay silent in the right places. A large round table, a pristine white tablecloth, crystal glasses so polished they reflected the pretense. On my left sat the Sterlings. On my right, the Dubois. The adults spoke as if reading from a script, every sentence polite, every word cloaked in formality. May our families grow closer, and may our children understand each other, leading to smooth cooperation. I listened. It sounded more like a project contract signing than a marriage discussion. My father smiled and raised his glass. Across from him, a middle-aged man, presumably the groom's father, returned the smile with a compliment that was impossible to verify. I wasn't paying much attention. I was focused on one person. Ethan Dubois. I had heard his name before mentioned like a brand everyone knew and respected, but no one dared approach. He sat, slightly angled, a white shirt the cuff, revealing a simple watch. He didn't smile much, but he didn't seem uncomfortable either. His gaze didn't wander with the conversation. It settled on each person, each sentence, each reaction sharp and keen. It was as if he wasn't participating but observing. I suddenly understood. He wasn't acting, and those who don't act often make others feel insecure. I took a sip of water. I tried to appear calm, but inside my nerves felt stretched taut. I was sitting across from someone who would see right through me. The meeting lasted nearly an hour. The adults discussed everything from family traditions to the future of the young couple, even mentioning choosing an auspicious date. I listened, nodding and smiling, everything flowing like a pre-edited video. Then, as if by ritual, they stood to discuss private matters. The door closed, and the space became utterly silent. Before I could relax my shoulders, his voice cut through the quiet, calm and clear. What do you want from this marriage? Not. Do you agree? Not. What do you think of me, but what do you want? I looked up. His gaze was direct, not forcing, but offering no easy way out. It was the question of someone accustomed to hearing the truth and seeing people evade it. I knew if I played along, if I said a few platitudes like, I will try my best, or I respect my family's arrangements, he would nod and dismiss me, and my life would be officially stamped. I placed my glass down, the gentle clink against the saucer, sharp and clear. Respect, I said, emphasizing each word as if driving in stakes for my freedom and independence. I paused, looked at him carefully, and then spoke my final sentence. The most important one, the one I wanted to be truly myself. I want to be myself, not a packaged version to suit others. In that moment, I thought he would laugh or say mockingly, "You think you can ask for so much." But he only nodded a slight nod, like a seal of approval. "Okay," he said. The 2 words I promised spoken by him didn't sound like a sweet vow, but like a clause already signed in his mind. I looked at him, a strange feeling blossoming. This man didn't seem interested in locking me up. He reached for the pen on the table, a stack of papers laid out thick and neat. He turned to the exact page, no further questions, no fanfare. The pen moved in a decisive line, his signature firm, unwavering. As if for him, the important thing wasn't fitting the mold, but being the right person. I looked at his signature, my heart slowing a beat just enough for me to realize this marriage might not be a cage, or at least if it was a cage, the one holding the key didn't seem intent on hiding it. He put down the pen and pushed the papers toward me. Your turn. I picked up the pen. A thought completely out of place, but so true it was almost hateful surfaced in my mind. Perhaps I had just met someone who didn't want to direct my life. I signed my name, the strokes not trembling. Outside, the voices of the adults began to drift in, cheerful as firecrackers. But in the private room, amidst the faint scent of tea and the warm lamplight, only one question of his lingered like a thin breeze. What do you want? Brenda Sterling entered my life like a walking rulebook. She stepped into the Dubois' living room, the scent of jasmine tea preceding her, her voice following smooth and perfectly timed. She wore in jade-green Cheongsam pearls at her neck, shining just enough to be noticed, but not so much as to be ostentatious. She scanned me from head to toe, her gaze, not malicious, but assessing, like looking at an item about to be put on display. Chloe, she said my name, drawing out the last syllable. Sit up straight. Don't slouch. Chin up slightly. I straightened my back a little further, my posture pulled by an invisible string. Brenda placed a small mirror on the coffee table and smiled. I pulled at the corners of my lips. Not like that. A smile needs grace. Don't show too many teeth, your eyes should crinkle, but not too much or they'll think you're faking. I looked in the mirror at my half-hearted smile. For a second I found it so funny I wanted to burst out laughing. Walking, she continued, her steps light so as not to make a sound. When greeting elders, bow at the correct angle. When complimented, be humble but not too humble or they'll think you're looking down on them. Each of her words was like a small hook reshaping me into a perfect mold. I listened, feeling as if I were being measured to tailor a suit that didn't belong to me. I put the mirror down. Mrs. Dubois. I addressed her by her title, polite but not soft. I'm not good at acting. Brenda looked at me, tilting her head slightly, waiting for me to continue. And I don't want to act. The air in the room stilled for a beat, as if someone had hit the mute button. Brenda didn't get angry. She took a sip of tea and placed the cup down very gently. You think this is acting, I replied. For me, if I have to smile according to a formula, stand according to a formula, speak according to a formula, then it's acting. She looked at me for a longer moment, her eyes weighing whether I was difficult to mold or simply worth taming. Finally, she said, in the Dubois household, etiquette is our armor. If you don't wear it, others will think you're naked. I heard her words and a clear thought emerged within me. I would rather be exposed to the cold wind than suffocated by armor. The first party arrived sooner than I expected. The ballroom glittered like a color-corrected photograph. Black, draped with crystal-thick carpets. The clinking of glasses. Laughter just enough not to be called excessive. I wore a simple, understated dress, my hair in a low bun, light makeup. Brenda Sterling looked at me before we left my room, saying only 4 words. Don't embarrass us. I nodded, not arguing. Ethan Dubois stood beside me, adjusting his cuff, saying nothing. He looked like he was attending an important meeting, his expression calm, his steps firm. We entered the ballroom. At first everything was fine. People greeted us, complimenting my beauty, calling us a perfect couple. Every word seemed pre-written. Until I heard 2 soft but sharp words that cut through the air. The speaker was a woman in her 30s, wearing a tight black dress, red lips, looking at me like she was observing a hot story that had just hit the front page. She smiled. I heard the original bride wasn't you. This is rather special. The people around her laughed reflexively. I felt their eyes converge on me, waiting for me to handle it, to smile appropriately, to play the role of the patient Mrs. Dubois, she asked again, her voice sweeter. Where do you come from? The Sterlings? They've always been very selective about their sons-in-law. Then she paused, letting the implication hang in the air, letting people's imaginations fill in the blanks. I clenched my fingers, my nails digging into my palm. In my mind, I had 2 choices. Smile, offer soft replies, and swallow it all. Or speak the truth. I wasn't here to be their entertainment. As I was about to open my mouth, Ethan Sterling spoke first. His voice wasn't loud or cold or heavy. It was direct. He looked at the woman. My wife is marrying me. Not performing. His words fell like a sharp pair of scissors cutting a string. The entire room fell silent. The wine glasses in some hands froze midair, the smiles on their lips stiffened as if suddenly turned off. The woman stood, stunned, her red lips still curved but unsure how to curve them anymore. Ethan didn't need to say more. He extended his hand naturally, placing it lightly on my back. A subtle gesture. But it was a clear declaration. She stands with me. In that moment, I felt that the engagement was a chain. But in that same moment, I saw someone who didn't hesitate to cut it. Not to be a hero simply because he saw it wasn't worth it. I glanced at his profile, his features calm, his eyes unwavering. He didn't care what they thought, and he didn't need them to like him. I suddenly understood something I had never experienced in my life. Some people put you forward not because you are perfect, but because they choose you. And for the first time, I felt I was in that position. Not a patch, not a replacement, just me. My wedding was picture perfect. So beautiful that if someone handed me a magazine and said, "This is the cover story this month," I wouldn't doubt it. The lights, white flowers, music, a large screen displaying carefully framed photographs. Brenda Sterling stood beside me, her gaze like an editor's. Every step, every bow, every smile of mine had to be just right. People said, "The bride today is truly worthy." I smiled appropriately, but in my heart I maintained a cold distance. Their beauty was not mine. From beginning to end, I never forgot. This might just be a contract decorated with white paper. Ethan Sterling stood beside me. As he recited his vows, his voice was deep and steady, not feigned. He looked at me as he had in the private room, direct and calm, not promising vague things. That's precisely why I remained wary of this man. He didn't speak sweet nothings. The more certain he was, the more I reminded myself not to relax too soon. The limousine to the Dubois mansion rolled through the gates. The garden lights cast a pale yellow glow, the trees trimmed as if in a painting. The house was large, silent, so beautiful that I could hear my own footsteps. I walked in the scent of wood and dried flowers, mingling everything clean, precise, like a place that didn't tolerate errors. Brenda Sterling had retired for the night, the maids had gone, leaving only Ethan and me. We stood in the second-floor hallway, the wall lamps casting long shadows. I suddenly felt like I was standing before a door, not knowing what lay beyond. I spoke first, no preamble. "Let's set the rules." Ethan looked at me unsurprised. He simply nodded as if he had expected me to do so. I continued my voice, even separate rooms, separate lives. "I need my space." I thought he would ask why or frown, thinking I was being unreasonable. But he answered immediately, so quickly it made me feel a little uneasy. "Okay." I looked at him, a sense of unease rising like a thin wave. "Do you agree so easily, or do you agree because you don't really need me? Or is this just a way to make things seem civilized?" I didn't like that feeling. I wanted certainty, to see the boundaries clearly, to know I was standing on solid ground, not ice. I tightened my grip on my purse strap and asked directly, "Do you agree because you don't care or because you respect me?" Ethan Sterling looked at me for a moment. Then a very faint smile touched his lips, not a social smile, but one that seemed to find my question reasonable. "I like people who set rules," he said. "It's the people who don't set rules that make me worry." I paused. His words were different from anything I was used to hearing. Girls should be patient, be understanding, don't make things difficult for others. He spoke as if boundaries were something to be praised, not stubbornness. He turned and walked toward the study. I remained where I was, watching him, a part of my wariness still lingering. A moment later, he returned a thin, neatly clipped folder in his hand. He handed it to me. I took it. I opened it. A commitment document, not spoken words, but signatures, seals, clauses, assets, ownership rights, independent accounts, the right to work, to study, the right to make decisions about my personal life. There was even a line clearly stating that all decisions concerning my body and private life required my consent. I read each line, my fingers slightly cold. In the Sterling household, the signatures of elders were always used to tie people down. Here, his signature was like a key placed in my hand. I looked up at him. He had prepared for my question, his voice betraying no doubt. "Yes," he replied. "Since you stated your conditions at the Sterling house, I bit my lip, not knowing whether to say thank you or be suspicious or ask why he went to such lengths." Ethan Sterling looked at me, his voice as calm as if he were discussing the weather. "You need to feel safe to live here. I don't want you guessing." A simple sentence, but it made something in my heart soften, then quickly refreeze. I signed my hand, steady. This time it was to acknowledge receipt and agreement to the terms. As the pen left the paper, I felt a strange urge to laugh. The beautiful wedding didn't feel real. But this dry, cold document full of text brought me peace. I folded the papers, holding them tightly in my hand like a charm. Ethan Sterling stood opposite me, his gaze not pressing me to believe him immediately, nor demanding I be moved. He just said, "Your room is at the end of the hall, mine is across the way. If you need anything, just say so." I nodded. I walked toward my room, hearing the soft click of his door closing. In the large, quiet house for the first time, I understood a different kind of rule. Not a rule to shape me into a mold, but a rule that allowed me to be myself. And the most frightening thing was, I was beginning to think this might not just be a contract. Millicent Sterling returned on a rainy afternoon. The rain wasn't heavy, the kind of city rain used as background for apologies and repentances. The gate of the Sterling house opened, the car stopped at the entrance. The person who stepped out was thinner, her hair slightly disheveled, her eyes red as if she had cried a whole season. My mother was the first to rush out. Millicent. Hearing that name sent a chill through me. Not because I hated her, but because I was too accustomed to the way that name always turned the family upside down while I was always the one left to clean up. Millicent threw herself into my mother's arms, crying like the rain outside her sobs, loud enough to melt everyone. It wasn't intentional, I really didn't mean to. They harmed me. The words "they harmed me" immediately became a shield. A shield that allowed all her mistakes to be relabeled as being wronged, forced, accidental. My father also came, his face a mixture of anger and pity. My uncle stood behind him, sighing as if he had just escaped a media disaster. I stood at the edge of the covered porch, watching the scene like a rerun. Only one difference. This time I was no longer in the old position. Millicent looked up, her wet eyes locking onto mine. In those eyes I saw everything. Self-pity, fear, and something fleeting, sharp like a blade beneath velvet. "Chloe," she called my name, her voice trembling. "You know me, you've suffered too." The words sounded like an apology, but felt like a brand on my forehead. "Yes," I said, "I suffered in your place." Before I could reply, she grabbed my hand. Her hand was cold, her nails beautifully manicured, the familiar scent of her perfume, the scent that had once convinced the entire household she was born to stand in the spotlight. She lowered her head, her voice soft and gentle. "You were just holding my place for me, right?" I froze. That sentence hit the deepest wound I always kept hidden. Holding my place, a patch, the one standing behind. My whole life, I'd heard different versions of the same idea. You're just here temporarily, don't think you belong. I pulled my hand away, not forcefully, but enough to create a noticeable distance between us. "It's good you're back," I said. My voice was so calm it was almost cold. "We can deal with the past later." Millicent looked at me, her lips still trembling, but her eyes quickly took in her surroundings. She looked like someone who had just entered a room that used to be hers, only to find the furniture rearranged, and she was starting to remeasure. Millicent's return spread like wildfire. Without anyone announcing it, Ethan knew. He came home earlier than usual that day. I was in the living room when I heard the door open. I turned and saw him taking off his coat, his movements neat. "Millicent's back," I said. He nodded, asking no further questions, his expression unchanged. I looked at him, a silly thought forming in my mind. How would he react to her? Even though I had reminded myself this was a contract, a person involved in a contract still had pride. Ethan looked at me for a beat, as if guessing my unspoken thoughts. "How do you want me to handle it?" he asked. I was silent for a few seconds. I don't want to look like a jealous wife, nor do I want to look like a dutiful wife who gives up her position easily. "It's up to you," I said, then added. "Honestly, I don't like feeling replaced." He nodded. Just a nod. But that nod made my heart sink a little, like a loosened string. The meeting took place in the Dubois living room the next evening. Brenda Sterling sat in the main seat, her posture perfect. I sat beside her, holding a teacup but not drinking. Millicent entered as if walking onto a stage. She wore a cream-colored dress, light makeup, her eyes still slightly red. When she saw Ethan Sterling, she paused for a beat, a pause long enough for anyone observant to realize she had once imagined standing there beside him. "Ethan!" she said, her voice hoarse, sounding as if she had just weathered a storm. Ethan stood up, polite, not warm, not cold, just proper. "Millicent," he called her name as if encountering an old acquaintance at a chance reunion. "Sit down." No lingering gaze, no, "Are you okay?" She looked at him, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Then she smiled, trying to salvage the atmosphere. I was truly wronged. That photo, my running away. Someone set me up. I was afraid to come back, afraid of dragging our family down. A statement just pitiable enough to evoke sympathy and just righteous enough to provide an excuse for forgiveness. Brenda Sterling looked at her without immediate comment, only asking, her voice flat. "So, what do you intend to do?" Millicent hesitated. Then she turned to me, her gaze soft with a hint of poison. My sister Chloe, she said, as if trying to recall the right title. She was just holding my place. Now that I'm back, I'll take responsibility myself. She made it sound as if she were being noble, but in reality she was putting me back in my old position. The one behind the temporary one. The one who should step aside for the right person in the right place. I placed my teacup down, the gentle clink echoing. I looked at Millicent and smiled. You're mistaken, I said. No one was holding anyone's place. Whose place is it? The person who sits there earns it. Millicent froze, the smile on her face faltering. Ethan Sterling spoke, then his voice still calm but his words as clear as a cut. Your issues with the Sterlings are between you and the Sterlings. Millicent and I are married. That position is not something that can be exchanged. He said Chloe's name naturally, without emphasis, without pretension. But it was precisely that naturalness that was chilling. Millicent looked at him, her eyes widening as if in disbelief. You don't regret it, she blurted out, then immediately bit her lip, realizing she had spoken out of turn. The air in the room froze. Brenda Sterling looked straight ahead, her gaze like a ruler. Ethan Sterling tilted his head slightly, looking at Millicent, as if at a question that no longer held meaning. Regret what, he asked, his voice flat. Regret a position that never truly belonged to you. The words weren't loud, but they hit like a blow. Millicent's face paled. I looked at her, and suddenly I felt no anger as I had imagined, only a brutal clarity. She hadn't returned to apologize to me. She had returned to reclaim the position she believed was hers. But that position had been pulled from her grasp by time and the choices of others. Millicent was silent for a long time, then let out a small, thin, broken laugh. So that place no longer belongs to me, she whispered, as if talking to herself. Outside the window, the rain continued to fall, but this time I wasn't standing under the awning watching others embrace. I was sitting right here in my place, and for the first time in my life I had no intention of yielding. The event was grandly titled, A Collaborative Project Launch with a Fundraising Gala. Elegant, sophisticated, and public enough to turn the misses into a photo-worthy prop from various angles. I knew the rules here. I entered the ballroom in a simple black dress, my hair in a low-bun jewelry, just enough not to be considered disrespectful but not so much as to be ostentatious. Brenda Sterling had instructed me earlier. Smile, appropriately, speak, little, stand in the right place. I nodded, but internally I maintained my old vigilance. This place didn't love people. It loved images. Ethan Sterling walked beside me, his hand resting lightly on my lower back, not pressing but always there. He greeted the necessary people, shook the required hands, his gaze calm as if entering a chess game where he had already seen several moves ahead. I thought tonight would pass according to the script. Until I saw Colin Sterling. He stood in the media area, a hint of a smirk, a polite smile, but his eyes held a particularly irritating kind of confidence. The kind of confidence of someone who knew he had just cast a line waiting for a fish to bite. Before I could turn away, whispers preceded me. I heard her background isn't clean. What's so surprising about a replacement, mister? Dubois married her just for appearances, didn't he? Each sentence wasn't loud, but it was spoken close enough for me to hear. They were deliberately trying to provoke. That's how people tarnish someone without taking responsibility, letting you hear it but not allowing you to object? A reporter approached her microphone, gleaming her smile as friendly as sugar-coated poison. Mrs. Dubois, she called me by my title. I heard you had a rather complicated past. There are rumors you've approached high society through unconventional means. Can you explain? A trap question. If I denied it, they would ask, can you prove it? If I stayed silent, they would write, she offered no comment. If I got angry, they would edit clips of Mrs. Dubois losing control. I looked at the microphone, at the array of cameras like the eyes of predatory beasts. In that moment, I felt pushed onto a stage where the script had already been written. It turned out their masks weren't to hide themselves. Their masks were to cover me. I took a breath, about to speak, but Ethan Sterling stepped forward half a pace. He didn't look at the reporter first. He looked directly at the crowd, as if he knew the important person wasn't the questioner but those waiting for me to falter. I thought he would object. I thought he would say the rumors were baseless or more coldly refuse to answer. But he didn't argue. He simply said, his voice calm, as if announcing an obvious fact. Chloe, he called my name, not Mrs. Dubois, not my wife, just my name. I turned. He extended his hand not to pull me back, but to invite me to stand beside him at the center of the attention. Then he continued, addressing the event organizer standing nearby, initiating the announcement. The entire ballroom seemed to be put on mute. An organizer quickly stepped onto the stage, the large screen behind them lighting up with the project logo. I hadn't even understood what he was doing when Ethan took the microphone. He didn't look at the script. He spoke directly. The Dubois family is the primary sponsor for tonight's project. The person in charge of its implementation from our side is Chloe. I heard every word clearly. Below, there were a few gasps swallowed before they could fully escape. He continued, not giving anyone time to rearrange their expressions. From today, she has the authority to represent this project in all external activities. All invitations, collaborations, and sponsorships will go through her. Not a shield, not standing behind me and having me handle it, but standing up here holding power so they had no right to look down on me. The reporters who had been so eager moments ago seemed to have their power cut. The microphones in their hands suddenly felt useless. The woman who had asked me the trap question opened her mouth but couldn't utter a word, because if she asked again, she would be attacking the representative of the largest sponsor at the event. The rules of the game had changed. With a single statement, I stood beside Ethan Sterling, hearing my heart beat louder than the background music. The large screen switched to an introductory slide. My name, my title, my scope of authority, my signed confirmation. This wasn't a verbal promise. It was a public declaration. Some people in the crowd began to nod as if suddenly remembering. Ah, respect is due now. Not because they respect me, but because they respect the power vested in me. I glanced towards Colin Sterling. He stood there, his smile still on his lips, but frozen. His eyes swept over me as if searching for the me he could control. But he couldn't find her this time. I suddenly saw his dirty gossip like a mask thrown in my face, waiting for me to panic, waiting for me to prove I was worthy. But Ethan Sterling didn't make me prove myself with words. He gave me a position where just standing there was enough to silence any contempt. The announcement ended, followed by applause, not entirely sincere but loud enough to drown out the whispers. Ethan Sterling put down the microphone and turned to me, his voice low. Let's go. We walked away and people started approaching me, calling me by my name, their eyes suddenly filled with respect. I looked at their faces, my heart feeling both cold and clear. They hadn't changed because of me. They had changed because of the new rules. I turned to look at Ethan Sterling. He was still calm, as if he had just done something ordinary, a realignment of order. I asked softly, afraid I had misunderstood. Why did you do that? He looked at me for a beat and said, very simple. Because you are not a decoration. I wanted to laugh, but my eyes welled up. In my life, people had sheltered me many times, sheltering me like a fragile object, hiding me to save face. But this was the first time someone had not shielded me. He lifted me into the light, giving me the right to stand tall and tell the world, don't touch her with dirty hands, because from today, she has her own rules. I walked on my shoulders, no longer hunched. And amidst the music, the clinking glasses, the laughter, I suddenly understood. He wasn't just protecting me from thorns. He was teaching me how to hold a needle and stitch my life back together according to the thread I chose. After that event, the thing that lingered the most wasn't the applause nor the flashing lights, but the feeling of standing on a pedestal that didn't belong to me. I carried it home, slinging it over my shoulder like an invisible bag. During the day, I still went out, still smiled, still worked. At night, when I put the bag down, it was still there like a stubborn stone. I was afraid of bothering him, afraid of him having to clean up consequences, afraid of people dragging him into the gossip that had nothing to do with him just because he chose to stand beside me. I was afraid that one day he too would think she's really too much trouble. So I withdrew. I spoke less, moved more quietly, tried to handle everything myself before it reached him. I became sadly proficient at making myself unobtrusive. One day he came home late, and I heard the door open. I remained in my room, not coming out to greet him. Not out of anger, but because I didn't know where I was supposed to stand. He knocked twice, then opened the door. Not asleep yet, he asked. I was sitting on the bed, my laptop open, the project documents glowing white on the screen. No, I replied. Finishing up. He looked at the screen, then at the dark circles under my eyes. He said nothing more, just walked in, turned off the main light, leaving only a dim bedside lamp. The light softened, and the whole room seemed to relax. Turn it off, he said. You can finish it tomorrow. I still have... He interrupted, his voice very even. My schedule has been changed. I froze. Changed. Yes. He pulled up a chair and sat down, taking off his watch and placing it on the table. I postponed the morning meeting. The rest will be handled by your team. You need to sleep. I looked at him, my heart feeling both warm and uneasy. The unease of someone accustomed to living with scarcity? Why change his schedule for me? I don't want to bother you, I blurted out. Ethan Sterling looked at me, his eyes darkening slightly as if he had heard a sentence he disliked. You're punishing yourself, he said. I didn't reply. He stood up, put on his jacket again, and changed his shoes. Where are you going? To eat. I looked at the clock, confused. It was almost 11 p.m. He seemed to read my thoughts. Did you eat dinner yet? I remained silent. Silence meant no. He nodded as if to say, I knew it. Then he held out his hand. Not rushed, not forcing. I hesitated for a second. Then placed my hand in his. His hand was warm, firm, like an unquestionable support. He took me to a small, unmarked restaurant. No sign, no background music, no flashing lights, just the sound of boiling water and the scent of ginger. The owner saw him and didn't ask many questions, just nodded and went into the kitchen. Before I could even ask, "Do you know this place?" a bowl of hot noodles was placed before me. Less oil, extra vegetables, no cilantro. I froze. You don't eat cilantro, he asked, as if it were a casual question. I looked at him, genuinely surprised. You remember? He nodded very lightly, as if it were nothing worth mentioning. Last time at your house, you picked out the cilantro. I looked down, took a sip of the hot broth which flowed down my throat and into the coldest part of my heart. His kind of sweetness wasn't expressed in words. Not, don't worry, I'm here, I love you, but changing his schedule to take me out to eat. A bowl of noodles without cilantro, a quiet restaurant. Small things to the point that, if he hadn't done them, no one would have blamed him. But he did them as if it were a natural obligation. I ate half the bowl and my eyes began to water. I lowered my head, pretending to look for a tissue. He didn't ask. He just placed a glass of warm water in front of me and said, You're going to sleep tonight. He said it as if it were a command. Phone outside the room. I chuckled softly, my voice hoarse. Are you controlling me? No, he said, his voice even. I'm protecting your sleep. That sentence sounded so real, so grounded, that it left me no room for resistance. Back at the house, he didn't come into my room. He just stood in the hallway and handed me a small box. I opened it. Earplugs. I looked up. You hate noise, he said naturally. I choked slightly, my heart softening like butter in heat. Are you investigating me? I joked, trying to lighten the mood. Ethan Sterling looked at me, his lips curving slightly. Why would I need to investigate? You lose sleep because of noise. You're tense because of noise. It's obvious. I didn't know what else to say. Just held the box of earplugs like a piece of evidence that I had been seriously noticed by someone. Before I went into my room, he called me back. One more thing. I turned. He held up his phone, displaying a short email. I didn't read it all, just caught a few keywords. Legal notice. Defamation, slander, dirty media. Handle it legally, he said. You don't need to get involved. I stood still, expecting to feel relief, but instead, I felt a pang of sadness. Sadness because I was used to handling things myself, used to apologizing before anyone could get annoyed, used to shrinking myself to avoid bothering others. I pursed my lips. I'm sorry. The two words left my mouth just as Ethan Sterling stepped closer. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone clearly deepened. Don't apologize for existing. I looked up. The hallway light cast a shadow on his eyes, making his gaze both dark and warm like a weighty piece. You are not a burden, he continued slowly. You are the one I chose. Do you understand? My throat felt tight. I wanted to say I understand, but the words got stuck somewhere, turning into a small nod. He looked at the nod as if it were enough. Sleep, he said. Eat breakfast tomorrow. The housekeeper will make oatmeal. You can eat it. I chuckled, my eyes welling up again. You even remember that. He turned towards his room, not looking back, just saying casually, Yes, you exist, and I will remember. His door closed softly. I stood alone in the hallway, holding the box of earplugs, feeling as if a chain had just been lifted from my chest. I went into my room, turned off the light. For the first time in a long time, I placed my phone outside, lay down, and felt that I had the right to sleep peacefully. No need to apologize, no need to prove myself, no need to disappear just to exist. I discovered that during a very ordinary evening, so ordinary it was annoying because real pain never announces itself, it simply slips in quietly like a needle. That day, I passed the study. The door was ajar, the light inside was on, and I could hear low, clear voices. Don't let representation become precedent. Someone external entered. It's hard to retract later. Brenda Sterling had agreed, but the second branch was using the engagement to pressure them. They said if he married the right person, they would yield their seats on the board. I froze. The right person, I didn't know what right meant. Right background, right family, right connections, or the right kind of person who could easily be put in a decorative position. But I understood quickly. This engagement wasn't just a marriage. It was a chess move. I didn't listen further. Not out of politeness, but because I was afraid if I heard one more word, my heart would automatically find every excuse to shrink. I went back to my room, closed the door, and leaned against the wall. My heart was beating a little fast, not out of anger, but because a thought had just sprouted easily. Perhaps I was chosen because I was easy to control. I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the commitment papers he had given me on our wedding night. They lay in the drawer like a charm. But that charm suddenly lost its warmth. Because if he married me for leverage, were all the kindnesses until now just a way to keep me obedient? I hated that feeling the most. The feeling that the moment I softened someone would remind me, don't forget your place. Ethan Sterling came home later than usual. I heard the door open, footsteps then, a soft knock on my door. Not asleep yet, I opened the door. He looked at me for a second, knowing something was wrong. He didn't beat around the bush. What's wrong? I stepped back, letting him enter. The door closed behind him, the click like a period. I stood facing him, not sitting. If I sat down, I was afraid I would weaken. I asked directly, without embellishment, "Did you marry me for benefits?" The air was silent. He didn't evade or react as if offended. He just looked at me, his gaze so calm it made me more uneasy. People are usually only calm when they are prepared for the question. Then he said, "Initially, yes." I felt a hollow in my chest a beat. Even though I had guessed, hearing it from him still felt like touching a raw wound. He didn't stop there. He continued slowly, "Now it's you." I looked at him, wanting to ask why, but my throat felt blocked. Ethan Sterling walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. He gestured for me to sit, but I didn't. He didn't force it, just said, "You think you're easy to control." I gave a dry laugh. "At least your family would think so." A stand-in bride without status, without position behind her elder sister her whole life. It sounds fitting to place her in a role that is both beautiful and silent. He looked at me, his eyes darkening. "You're not silent," he said. "You were forced to be silent." I wanted to argue, but the truth was he was right. Ethan Sterling opened a drawer, took out a thin folder, placed it on the table, and pushed it toward me. "Read it." I looked at the folder but didn't touch it immediately. "What is this?" "Evidence," he replied. "Proof that my choice didn't start the day you became a stand-in." I sat down, my fingers opening the folder slowly, as if afraid of what lay inside would shame me. Inside were a few photocopied pages, a confirmation email, and a short note. I read them, I understood. It was about me from before. Something I had once thought of as luck. Once I was caught in a complicated situation at school, at work. Someone deliberately framed me, almost causing me to lose my scholarship and my job. At that time, I ran everywhere, explaining myself, pleading for help. Eventually, the situation was resolved very quickly. The other party withdrew their complaint. The school and company changed their attitude, and my record was kept. I thought someone must have seen my innocence. But this folder contained clear traces. An email from Ethan Sterling's assistant to a person in charge, along with evidence requesting, "Do not let an innocent person pay the price for someone else's game." The date sent was before the Sterlings called me into the study, even before the stand-in proposal. I looked up, my hand, holding the papers, trembling slightly. I didn't know what to call him in that moment. "How did you do this?" Ethan Sterling looked at me for a long time, then said in a low voice, "Because I saw you." That sentence was soft but not saccharine. It was like a frank acknowledgement. He had noticed me before, not because the contract pushed me towards him. I chuckled softly, but my eyes welled up. Then why was there a benefit? At first I asked, clinging to the rational part. He didn't evade. Marriages in the Dubois family don't start purely out of affection. He spoke as if stating a rule. But among many beneficial options, I chose the one I wanted. I looked down at the papers. My rational mind began to believe, but another part of me, the part that was used to standing behind and being left behind, still trembled. Believing was one thing, daring to believe was another. I closed the folder, placing it on the table as if lifting a heavy stone from my chest, but the weight still remained. I took a breath, my voice lowering. "I'm starting to believe, but I'm still afraid." Ethan Sterling nodded, not smiling. "Fear is normal," he said. "But you don't have to be afraid alone." He stood up, walked in front of me. He didn't hug me, didn't touch me hastily, just leaned down, placing his hands on the edge of the table, maintaining just enough distance so I wouldn't feel invaded. "Chloe," he called. I looked up. "You can doubt me. You can ask. You can set new rules anytime." His gaze was direct. "I don't need you to be obedient. I need you to be real." My chest tightened. I nodded very slightly. In my mind, the word contract still loomed like a shadow, but beside it, for the first time, there was something else. Possibility. The possibility that the man in front of me didn't just want to win a game of chess. He wanted me to stand with him as a real person. And the most terrifying thing was I was starting to want to believe it even though my heart still trembled. Millicent Sterling acted in her own way. Soft, gentle, clean. But it only took her a second to drag someone into the mud. It started with a recording. Not long, just a few tens of seconds. My voice chopped up. The sharp parts kept the soft parts removed. They paired it with a headline juicy enough to go viral. Sister steals engagement, admits to holding place, then steals it outright. Accompanied by some inside sources, it claimed I had long targeted the Dubois family, deliberately schemed, deliberately replaced my sister to take her position, even threatened the Sterlings with conditions. Each sentence was half true, half fabricated enough to make people believe enough to make me unable to refute it clearly. I woke up, opened my phone, and the screen was flooded with messages like a swarm of ants. I read a few comments and turned it off. Not because I was strong, but because I knew if I read more, I would start finding fault with myself. The old habit of someone who stood behind thinking she must have made some mistake. Ethan Sterling called me down to the living room. Brenda Sterling was already there, dressed in dark colors, her face calm, her eyes so cold they seemed to chill the entire room. She placed an iPad on the table, the screen still showing the recording. "Explain yourself," Brenda said. I looked at her, then at Ethan Sterling. He stood behind me, slightly to the side, not stepping forward, not shielding me, nor stepping back. His posture was like a reminder. "You speak. I'm here." Brenda continued, her voice not loud, but each word like a needle piercing the skin. "You are already part of the Dubois family. You can lose face, but the Dubois family cannot. How do you intend to handle this?" I understood her. To her, honor was the skeleton. Without it, she would break. But for me, I was used to losing face. I only hated one thing: being dragged back into the old pit where people just needed to point, and I had to bow my head. I took a breath. "I will clarify things myself," I replied. Brenda Sterling frowned. "Are you going to cry in front of the media? Or beg them to believe you?" I looked at her directly. "I will not cry, nor will I beg." She was silent. I took out my phone, opened my contacts, and called the project's media relations department. Not to ask for help, but to inform them. "Organize a briefing today. I will be present." The voice on the other end sounded panicked. I heard the woman's voice without hesitation. I replied with just one word: "Confirmed." Ethan Sterling spoke, then his voice low. "I'll have them secure the location and control the questions." That was all. He didn't speak for me. He didn't take the microphone. He just cleared the stage and let me walk onto it. The briefing took place in the project study. No flowers, no music, no flattering lighting, just bright white light, a long table, a microphone, and rows of people. I walked in without heavy makeup, without a fancy dress. I wore a white shirt, my hair tied back neatly. I saw a few familiar faces: reporters, bloggers, even some of the people who had laughed behind my back at the previous party. They looked at me as if I were prey walking into a trap. I placed the papers on the table, my hands steady. I spoke before they could even formulate their questions. The recording being circulated is a doctored product. Whispers erupted. I continued, "I have the original version. I have the timestamps and the context of the conversation." I turned on the screen behind me, which displayed a short timeline with dates and times. The full content of the original recording does not mention me stealing or holding a place to steal. I spoke about boundaries, about not wanting to live as a patch. I looked down at the rows of seats. I am not fighting for anyone's engagement. I agreed to be a stand-in because the Sterlings requested it, and I set conditions because I refused to be turned into a decoration. I paused to let them absorb every word, then continued, my voice calm to the point of being cold. "If you call that stealing, then I ask, does someone pushed onto a stage have the right to request not to be blinded?" Some people lowered their heads to take notes. Others began to change their expressions. The trap question came immediately. Just as I predicted, a reporter stood up. "You say it's edited, but can you prove who is behind it? Is it Millicent or Colin Sterling?" I looked directly at the questioner and replied, "I am not speculating. I am presenting evidence. As for who is behind it, the legal system will answer." I didn't mention Millicent's name. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood mentioning her name now would turn everything into family drama, and that was exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to lose control, to yell, to cry. I wouldn't give them that. I flipped to the last page and presented a document: the project representation rights, signatures, and the confirmation of its prior public announcement. I looked at everyone in the room. I am here as the person responsible. I am not a guest, nor am I a wife accompanying her husband. I have a job authority and responsibility. Anyone who intentionally slanders me to disrupt the project will face the full extent of the law. I heard a soft intake of breath, not because they feared me, but because they realized they could no longer easily bring me down. Throughout the entire session, Ethan Sterling stood beside me. He didn't say a word, but his presence was like a red stamp of approval. This is her position, and I acknowledge it. When the briefing concluded, I stepped down. My phone vibrated continuously. Messages, calls, notifications. I didn't need to open them to know the wind had shifted. The doctored recordings began to be questioned. Those who had once mocked me were now changing their tune. It seemed she was framed. Perhaps the replacement wasn't her fault. Public opinion turned as quickly as it had once turned against me. I stood in the hallway and let out a long breath. Ethan Sterling looked at me, his eyes calm. "You did well," he said. I smiled. This time, the smile wasn't according to any formula, but I also knew the game wasn't over because Millicent wouldn't give up after one round. She had one last card to play, a card poisonous enough to make her dare to strike. And the most terrifying thing was, I was starting to feel ready to receive it. The Sterling family's board meeting wasn't held in a conference room. It was held in a space that resembled a tea room more. Sandalwood, dark wood, ceramic vases, inkwash paintings. Everything was soft, but this softness wasn't for relaxation. It was the shell of power. The quieter it was, the more dangerous. I entered with Ethan Sterling. I wore a simple, neutral-colored outfit, not too bright to be considered overbearing, nor too dull to be considered fearful. I kept my back straight, my gaze calm, but my palms were still slightly cold. There were no media present today, but the stares here were sharper than camera flashes. The people seated around the table were faces I had only seen once or heard about from others. The second branch, the third branch. A few elderly individuals who didn't speak much, but whenever they did, it was like a final decision. Brenda Sterling sat at the head, her face expressionless like a jade statue. She glanced at me, neither praising nor criticizing, just acknowledging my arrival. "He's from the second branch," Charles Sterling began, his voice smooth, but his eyes sharp. "He's nominally a coordinating representative, but I hear he's the one pulling the strings behind recent troubles." His smile was always polite, but it was the kind of politeness that masked a dagger. "Let's get straight to the point," Charles Sterling said. "The recent incident has affected the family's image. The alliance with the Sterlings has already experienced fluctuations." He paused, looking directly at me. "To stabilize the situation, I suggest Chloe withdraw from her position as project representative and avoid public appearances for a while. As for her title, we can temporarily maintain it, but reduce its public profile to avoid provoking public opinion." Each word was beautifully crafted, but the intent was venomous. "Disappear, so we can arrange things more easily." I clenched my fingers under the table. Charles Sterling continued, his voice softer, as if negotiating. "Chloe, you're a sensible person. You know your position is sensitive, but one step, and the whole family will be at peace, and the Sterlings will also be at peace." The words "your position" were like a hook dragging me back to my old label, the placeholder. In that moment, I thought I would stand up, would object. But Ethan Sterling placed his hand on the armrest of my chair, a light touch as if to say, "Stay put. I've got this." He stood up. The room fell silent. Ethan Sterling didn't look at Charles Sterling first. He scanned the room, his gaze passing over each face as if listing those who thought they had the right to decide my life. "Stabilize the alliance," he repeated, his voice flat. "Who told you the alliance needs Chloe to disappear?" Charles Sterling smiled. "Not disappear, just reduce risk." "What risk?" Ethan Sterling asked back. "Is it the risk that people will discover Mrs. Dubois isn't a decoration?" That sentence made a few people's expressions change slightly. Brenda Sterling looked down at her teacup, unreacting. Charles Sterling maintained his smile. "Ethan, this is a family matter, don't get involved." "Family matter," Ethan Sterling cut in. He turned to the assistant standing behind him. The assistant placed a thick dossier with red seals on the table. Ethan Sterling opened the first page, his voice still calm. "This is the legally completed document of rights." He continued, certified and effective immediately. He looked directly at Charles Sterling. "It includes ownership of assets related to the marriage, Chloe's financial independence, her authority in external activities as delegated by me, and a clause protecting her honor. Anyone who uses rumors to force her to withdraw can be prosecuted." A collective gasp filled the room. Charles Sterling faltered for a moment. "Ethan, are you threatening the family with legal documents?" Ethan Sterling didn't smile. "No," he replied. "I set the rules." He flipped another page and pushed the dossier towards the center of the table. "And this is my decision. Chloe will continue to hold her position as project representative." No withdrawal, no reduced public appearances. She works with her ability and authority, not with anyone's permission. Charles Sterling began to look genuinely annoyed. But public opinion, Ethan Sterling said, his voice very cold, is what you use to attack the weak. You've chosen the wrong target today. He paused, then the final words fell clear and slow like a hammer hitting the table. Chloe is the sole Mrs. Dubois. He didn't call my name as he usually did, but used my title. In this room of power, a title was a seal that people thought could be changed, returned, or temporarily held. Ethan Sterling looked directly at each person, his voice not loud, but no one dared to interrupt. There is no placeholder, no temporary position. Anyone who still uses those words is denying my decision and denying my marriage. Silence fell, not a polite silence, but the silence of someone who had just realized the game was up. The escape route was blocked. Brenda Sterling finally looked up. She looked at Ethan Sterling for a long time, then at me. Her gaze was no longer just assessing. It was like an acknowledgement. She placed her teacup down with a soft click. Very well, she said. If these are the rules, then the entire family will follow them. Charles Sterling pursed his lips, his face tense. He wanted to say more, but in this room he wasn't the one who had set the rules. I sat still, but something inside me felt like it was shifting position. All my life I had been called the supporting role, the sister, the patch, the substitute. Today, in this place of power, he called me by my title and made the entire family listen. I turned to look at him. Ethan Sterling stood tall, his hand on the back of my chair, a silent declaration. She is here in this exact position, and the entire family, whether they liked it or not, had to understand. I wasn't holding a place, I was the chosen one. And that choice had been sealed. Millicent Sterling had once told me, her voice, very soft, very emotionally charged, I just want love and freedom. Back then she spoke that sentence as if it were a truth. As if having to pay a price for love was the fault of the world, not her fault. Now the bill had arrived. And the funny thing was, bills always came right when people believed they were special. She found me late one evening without an appointment. The doorbell rang once briefly, then went silent. I opened the door and saw Millicent standing under the hallway light, her face deathly pale, her lips no longer the vibrant red they usually were. Her eyes were still red, but this time it didn't look like acting. It looked like she had cried herself dry and still didn't know what to do next. In her hand, she held a crumpled stack of papers hastily stuffed into a Chloe Sterling bag. She called my name, her voice hoarse. I didn't invite you in right away. I stood blocking the door, making the distance clear. What is it? Her voice was dry. She tried to remain calm, but her trembling hands were unmistakable. Colin, she said quickly. He turned on me. He used my name to sign things. Contracts, guarantees, transfers. Now the other party is demanding payment. They say they'll sue, they'll go public. I looked at her, silent. In my mind, I saw her standing on the porch of the Sterling house, her eyes red, saying she had been wronged, then turning to me and saying, You were just holding my place for me. She might truly have been wronged, but she wasn't blameless. Millicent tugged at my sleeve, her grip so tight it hurt. Help me just this once. If this blows up, I'm finished. The Sterlings will be finished too, and you'll be dragged down. I slowly pried her hand away. What do you want me to do? She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening as if preparing to beg. Tell Ethan Sterling to intervene. Use the Dubois lawyers, have them mediate. I owe you, she choked out the last sentence, soft and venomous like habit. You owe me. I looked at her, the phrase, you owe me, like a hook, snagging on an old wound. It pulled me back to my childhood. You were praised, I was told to yield. You made mistakes. I was told you were weak. You needed it. I had to give it. I stood still for a few seconds, then said very clearly, each word placed deliberately, I don't owe you. Millicent's eyes widened. Chloe. From the day I was born, I said, my voice calm to the point of coldness, I have lived as if I owed you a life, owed you a smile, owed you a concession, owed you a position, but I didn't live to compensate you. Her face began to contort, self-pity, turning into anger, begging turning into a threat. How can you say that, she blurted out, her voice rising. If it weren't for me running away, you wouldn't be Mrs. Dubois, I interrupted. Yes. But do you think I benefited for free? Do you think I just stepped up and was handed a crown? I chuckled, no longer amused. I paid with my entire childhood standing behind you, and with all the days I was called a replacement. I don't owe you. I just mistakenly thought I did. Millicent bit her lip, her eyes turning red. So are you going to watch me die? I replied, my voice even. I'm going to watch you take responsibility. Her gaze faltered. That sentence must have been harder to hear than any scolding. Because she was used to using love and freedom as an excuse, used to using being wronged as a shield, but responsibility wasn't something you could cry to change. Ethan Sterling appeared in the hallway as if he had been standing there all along. He glanced at Millicent very politely, but his eyes were distant, as if looking at a stranger. "You're at the wrong house," he said. Millicent turned to him as if grabbing onto a final lifeline. "Ethan, help me, I was truly—" "I've heard enough," he interrupted. His voice was calm, but firm. Millicent choked. Ethan Sterling looked at me as if asking, "How do you want to handle this?" I didn't say help her nor kick her out. I just said handle it legally. Right person, right task. Ethan Sterling nodded. He turned to Millicent. "I will have the lawyers review the contract and the debts. If your signature was forged, we will assist in filing a report and cooperating with the investigation. If you signed it yourself, you are responsible." The words, "If you signed it yourself, you are responsible," fell like stones, but it was Ethan Sterling's form of mercy. Not to step on her further, nor to sugarcoat it. He continued, "We will not settle with money to cover for you. We will only ensure you have the proper legal avenue. That's enough." Millicent looked at him, then at me. In her eyes, something was shattering, not just the hope of being saved, but the illusion that everyone was a tool, that if you just pushed the right buttons, they would move according to your will. Her lips trembled. "I'm helping you become an adult. I'm not helping you escape." Millicent let out a laugh, but it was dry and broken. A moment later, she turned and left. Her steps were unsteady, like someone who had just discovered that love and freedom wasn't a free ticket but a loan. The larger the loan, the higher the interest. The elevator door closed, swallowing her inside. The hallway became quiet again. I stood there, my heart still aching slightly, an old ache, an ache for family, for blood ties, for the hope that she would be different. Ethan Sterling stood beside me, not hugging me, just asking softly, "Are you okay?" "Yes," I said. "Honestly, I'm sad, but I don't regret it." He nodded. "That's the boundary I spoke of, and you've maintained it." I looked at the elevator door and a realization dawned on me. Millicent lost not because I was better than her. She lost because she always saw others as tools. Mom, Dad, McCollin, even Ethan Sterling. Everyone was just an object for her to place in the right position to serve her needs. But life wasn't her chessboard forever. When the bill came, no one was there to pay for her. And for the first time, I wasn't the one stepping forward to hold her place. Brenda Sterling's change wasn't a sudden U-turn. She didn't suddenly grab my hand, call me daughter, and tear up with emotion like in a movie. She was the type of person who had held a measuring tape her entire life. Held it for so long that her palms bore the marks. Her change was like someone willing to put down the tape for a moment. That morning I was getting ready to go out. White shirt, hair tied back neatly, carrying my laptop bag. I passed the living room and saw Brenda Sterling sitting on the sofa, a hot cup of tea on the table. She looked at me, didn't ask where I was going or remind me to eat breakfast. She just said, "No makeup." "I'm not used to it," I replied. Brenda Sterling looked at me for another beat, then nodded slightly as if she had just revised an old conclusion in her mind. "That's fine," she said. "Quality isn't in makeup." Those words from her were a form of acknowledgement, not intimate, not gentle, but enough for me to know she had stopped trying to mold me into a stereotype. I said yes and prepared to leave. Before I reached the door, she called Chloe. I turned back. Brenda Sterling put down her teacup and said, her voice even, "The Dubois family has no shortage of perfect wives, but we lack someone who can stand firm." She finished speaking without looking at me again, as if the words didn't require a response. I stood still for a second, then bowed my head slightly, not at the prescribed angle, but a bow of my own. I continued to study to work. In the project meetings, no one called me Mr. Dubois's wife in front of me anymore. They called me by my name, by my title, by what I accomplished. Sometimes the pressure still came, sometimes I still lost sleep, sometimes I still wondered if I was moving too fast. But it was different. Because each time I entered a room of power, I no longer felt like I was asking for a place. I was standing in the right place. Ethan Sterling didn't turn me into a standard wife. He turned me into a partner. We discussed work like two people holding the same map. He didn't pull me along, nor did he push me forward to see if I would fall. He walked beside me, occasionally pointing to a spot and saying, "This area is dangerous. Wait for me to choose the path." I liked that kind of companionship, not flashy, not cheap romance, but it gave me a sense of security that made me want to live a little longer. And then one day, he proposed to me a second time. Not because we weren't married, but because he said, "I want to redo that important step in the way you like." That day, there was no fancy restaurant, no stage, no perfect white flowers. Just a very ordinary evening. I finished work late, and when I got home, the kitchen lights were on, the faint scent of oatmeal and ginger lingering. On the dining table were two bowls, a small plate of food, and a warm desk lamp. No background music, no noise. Exactly what I hated most when stressed. Things that were too perfectly arranged. I looked around. Did you make this? Ethan Sterling stood by the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, looking at me. Yes. Wash your hands. I wash my hands. Sit down. He placed in front of me a bowl of oatmeal, perfectly softened, not too sweet, with a little chopped fruit. Exactly how I liked it when I couldn't sleep. I looked at him speechless, my heart softening to the point of fear. I had eaten half the bowl when he put down his chopsticks. Chloe, he said. I looked up. He took a small box from his pocket. Not dazzling, not ostentatious. The box was as simple as everything he did. He opened it to reveal a delicate, clean ring, needing no proof to anyone. I know we signed papers, he said, his voice calm, but that was for the game. Now, I want to ask you, not for anyone else. Do you want to be by my side in the true sense of your choice? In that moment, I felt myself returning to the girl who had stood outside the Sterling conference room, hearing herself called a replacement. I had been afraid I wasn't standard enough, not worthy enough, not beautiful enough to stand in the center. But now, before me was a man who had set the rules to make the entire family call me by my rightful title. I exhaled, chuckling softly. Aren't you afraid I still don't fully believe you? Ethan Sterling curved his lips, a very light smile, a prince-like but not arrogant smile. I like people who know fear, he said, because those who fear know how to protect themselves. Then he added, his voice lowering as if speaking only to me, but I will make you believe. By living, I looked at the ring, my eyes welling up. I nodded. He didn't cheer, didn't embrace me tightly like in the movies. He just stood up, walked around the table, bent down, and placed the ring on my finger. His fingers were warm, his movements concise, like signing a clause, but it was the only clause in the world I wanted to sign voluntarily. I looked at the ring on my hand, then at him. I said softly, as if to myself, I'm afraid I'm not standard enough. Later, I would understand the only standard was whether that person dared to place me in a worthy position. Ethan Sterling looked at me, his gaze so peaceful it made one want to lean on him. He said, it's very simple. My standard is only you. I chuckled, but my eyes welled up. Outside, the world was still noisy. In this house, I was still not a standard wife. I was not planning to become one. I was myself. And this time, I stood in the right place. Not because someone yielded, but because someone dared to put me there, and I dared to stay.